Okay, sounds good. All right, you guys, welcome to Beyond PCN, brought to you by Kumu here on Undiscovered X. My name is DJ Marlino, and I am the founder and host of Heavy Rotation, the first and only global podcast and music show for Filipino hip hop and R&B. I'm also the program director for Mix Global, which includes Mix Radio and TV. And if you don't know what Mix is the first global platform that celebrates the next generation of Filipino artists, creatives, and filmmakers with mixers all across the world. And so today, we got a dope panel that we're going to be talking about. If you've ever been to a PCN or know people who have done it, who have also participated in creating it and performing in it, this panel is going to talk about what next. What can I do with the experience that I had in PCNs and take that to the next level? So we have some amazing panelists that are going to join us today. And my girl Gina is in the house. How are you feeling?
I'm great. I just wanted to stop in at the beginning and say hi and just shout out Kumu for, really doing the work to outreach to this college pillared community, because there's so much potential with collegiate pillorgs and so much potential for how to keep that movement going after they graduate. So I'm excited for this discussion.
Awesome. All right. So thank you so much, Gina, for having me. And for everyone out there right now, if you're watching, go ahead and share this so we can get more people in the room. And so what we're going to do, I thought would be a good idea, is we're going to start with the history of the PCNs. And so I have some experts in the house who are going to talk about their experiences, and we'll call them up one by one so you get a firsthand hearing of what they went through and what they're doing now. So my first guest is Ana Alves, and she is a writer and doctoral candidate of American Studies at Rutgers University in Newark. So let's welcome Ana. Go ahead, Ana, you can come on up. All right, and while Ana is coming up, just press that button at the top. There you go, Ana. Okay. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking me to be part of this panel. And I am chiming in from Quezon City, Manila.
Oh, that's right. You're in the Philippines.
5 a.m. right now.
Oh.
So as I'm on, the light will change because the sun will come up. So
all right. Well,
anyway, good morning from me for everyone, although I believe it's afternoon there on the West Coast.
2 o'clock.
So as Marlena says, I'm currently at Rutgers University, but I went to UCLA as an undergrad, and I got my MA in Asian American Studies there as well. I was heavily involved with UCLA SOMA Pilipino and their PCNs from 1990 through 1996, all the way through grad school. The UCLA PCN as a cultural identity process in relation to its political history as an organization was the subject of my MA thesis. So as part of that thesis work, I also coordinated oral history projects interviewing past leaders and organizers of Samahang and of the PCN, and created the UCLA Archives, UCLA Samahang Filipino Archives collection, which is located in UCLA Archives with materials dating back to before its founding in 1972, and has past PCN show collections that covers 1982 through the early 2000s. So that's the background for sort of like how I was able to get all this material, which I'm going to share with you very briefly. So the original intention of PCN at UCLA was that it was a cultural work arm of their political and social work as an organization. It was also serving as an alternative cultural education space in absence of Filipino Americans since inception. It recruited for and community built within its membership of Samahang Filipino, because the numbers were smaller then, and then they eventually expanded. The seeds for the PCN at UCLA evolved from cultural presentations of usually cultural dances as part of Asian American parades or festivals starting in 1973, and as skits created for the Far West conventions that Samahang participated in throughout the West Coast. Then around 1982 or 1983, the first PCN in the standard form that we know of now, the theatrical stage presentation with cultural dance, script narrative, was put on at Ackerman Ground Ballroom on campus, and there were about 50 participants. Then in 1986 was the first time that their show moved to a large theatrical space at Royce Hall on campus, which is the professional theater of UCLA. Where, like, Alvin Ailey will come and perform and whatnot. And it used to be closed to students. But at that time, Samahang Filipino, the group, advocated for and won the right for student groups to use that professional theater, since it was part of the campus and it was part of their student fees. And after that, other student groups followed. By then, the cast had, grown to about 100 participants. Then around 1991 at UCLA, the standard PCN that we know of now definitely solidified. They played with form, some storytelling forms, and we're looking at casts of up to like 200 between 1993 and 1996. And these were the times that I was there. Obviously, it's changed now. And I'm curious to hear the current students tell me what it's like now. But UCLA changed up its format. They performed at many different theaters. So they performed at Royce Hall. They performed at the Wiltern Theater downtown LA because of the earthquake, the 1994 Northridge earthquake. They went back to Ackerman Grab Ballroom and created it as a festival instead. They weren't, when they also were did it in Poly Pavilion with multi-stages. They weren't wedded to format or venue, and it allowed for more innovation and resiliency. So those goals, or the original goals of PCN, as I said before, and it seemed, there seemed to be a thread throughout the interviews, were, again, to educate members, to educate participants, and to educate multi-ethnic audiences, to community build for and beyond its membership, with the communities around them as well. SIPA used to have their youth play, have a part in the show. When there were manongs at Delano, we used to bring the manongs to our shows. One of my memorable ones was when Philip Veracruz came, and we got to meet him backstage, which was really inspiring and moving. And then it's also within the process to create intergenerational community amongst alumni and with current students, so that you could feel like this long legacy of folks. And it was a community, we're talking about beyond PCN, it ends up being a community that goes beyond PCN.
Now,
so that, in general, that's sort of my like brief little explanation of the context and history of PCN at UCLA.
Now, being a part of the PCN, what would you say was the most important aspect that you continue to keep with you from these times?
Well, there are several, but I mean, two of the things that definitely have sort of, I guess, anchored my life are one, sort of the skills, but for me, because I was actually a PCN committee member, so I didn't just perform in suites or do narrative. I also was a script writer. I also was on the main organizing committee. So of course, we were doing the nuts and bolts. So that type of organizational sort of skill set stayed with me in terms of community organizing, in terms of like even work, in terms of being able to coordinate different sort of publics, because I went into foundation work after that, and I've been in academia, and those skills actually have served me. The second thing was this notion of history and legacy and community, because within that community building process, I've had, created lifelong friends, and not just lifelong friends, but lifelong fellow advocates and activists, like colleagues or just like compadres, because you need them, because activism is a lifelong process. Yeah. And when you think about anything in the arts that you do, and culture as part of your work, cultural work as part of the political existence that you have, or that you're trying to continue to have, especially in the United States, then it is a long-term deal. And so that's something that I found that has stayed with me, definitely. I mean, so the friends that I've made in Samahang and through PCN, or that process, I should say, are still my friends, and are still sort of like fighting alongside and still fighting. And it's inspiring and it's motivating. It's also comforting when times are difficult, as we know.
Amazing. So we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that when we bring the whole entire group up and talk about that in more context. So I'm going to put you down. We're going to bring up our next guest, so hang tight. So let's bring up Dr. Theodore S Gonzalez. He is the curator at the Smithsonian National Museum and American History. So Dr. Theodore, welcome.
Hey there. You can call me Theo. It's great to be with you.
Hi, Theo. How are you? So let's talk about what was the original intent of PCNs at your school when you were in college?
Well, I'm born and raised in Fort Ord, California, which no longer exists. It's on the Monterey Peninsula, so that was home to me. But growing up, I didn't have a sense of Asian American history or Filipino American history. I ended up going to Santa Clara University for my bachelor's degree from '86 to '90. Took a year to work in county government up in Northern California. Then I found myself at San Francisco State from '91 to '93. And I was at the political science department getting my master's degree, but I really spent most of my time hanging out with the folks in Asian American ethnic studies, including folks like Dan Begonia and Dan Gonzalez and the rest of the crew there. But that's really where I spent a lot of time working with the folks in PACE, the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor. So I ended up working with PACE as a student organizer, and I got roped into performing in a PCN in 1992. So we were celebrating our 25th anniversary as an organization, PACE was.
Yeah.
And the idea was to kind of think about what was the history of this organization. And the play was about the founding of the group. So it reached all the way back to the late 60s and what would eventually become the first College of Ethnic Studies. So that was really eye-opening for a lot of us, is kind of think about the history of that organization in relation to the struggles of the late 60s and on that campus, and ethnic studies, and the longest student strike in history. And I just ended up becoming more involved. So I was part of the cast in that 92 show, but in 93, I ended up becoming one of the officers in PACE. So I was a grad student, so there weren't that many grad students that were part of the organization, but I joined anyway because it was a really great group. And I think one of the things that we found was that a lot of us were developing a criticism of the PCN, of the cultural nights, because what was happening was that we were finding that a lot of students were not coming back to campus year after year because the tuition was going up.
Yeah.
And we were finding what was happening with our brothers and sisters. How come they're not making it back? And semester after semester, we were realizing that this is a real economic crunch. And yet the administration was just giving us thousands of dollars to put on these shows. And it gave us kind of a shock to the system to ask, well, they're giving us thousands of dollars to put on these shows of culture and dance and history and music. But we're not actually tending to our own brothers and sisters on this campus. Where are they? Should they be here with us? And what's really the cost of putting on these shows when they're not here with us? So that it forced us, I think, to really experiment with the format of the show. And in 93, the cultural coordinator there was Deborah Balali, which is one of my classmates and a really great friend. The idea was to kind of not do away with the show, but really kind of reprogram, reformat the whole thing, because so much of it was kind of tied up, all this anxiety and the rehearsal and all that was tied up to one day. And I'm glad Anna is on this session, because over the years I've gotten to really get to know her work and to respect the things that she's done at UCLA. We were encountering a lot of the same things with the history at SF State around that time. It had been around since the 60s and 70s. It kind of had grown organically, but for a lot of us, it was becoming stale. It was becoming predictable. And we were wondering, because of the economic cost of what was happening with the rest of the country, how come we're using these resources in a way that's not tending to our own culture? So what we wanted to do was to take the heat off that one day and to really try to pay attention to what we were doing in our various communities. How was art connected to our neighborhoods? Yeah. And the thing that was really speaking loudly to a lot of folks, especially if anyone was around in the 1990s, I know I'm coming from the 20th century, but that's how old I am. Hip hop was really anchoring for a lot of us. Hip hop, spoken word, poetry. A lot of us saw ourselves as part of the San Francisco State scene that produced this volume called Liwanag, which was an anthology of poetry, short stories, and visual art. Across the bay, the folks over at Berkeley were producing another magazine called Maganda. Yep. And so a lot of us kept thinking about poetry, spoken word, and hip hop. And as you know, that's also the time of the mobile DJ crews and scratch DJs. So we're thinking, what was the vital energy of Filipino American history and culture that we really wanted to pay attention to? So we devoted a whole night to that, to teaching young kids how to scratch, how to think about hip hop, how to situate it historically as part of a long history of art making, and also kind of situate the long history of Filipino arts with activism in the city. How Manila Town was always tied to these collectives that focused on poetry making and art making. So we really tried to think about how to make the art relevant to our present, and that was quite a long time ago. That was 28 years ago. But you know, the thing is with these PCNs, they're very durable, and people have a lot of commitments to the format of those dance suites that have been popularized by the Bainihans since the 1960s. So over the years, you know, I've seen different shows, different campuses experiment with the form, and a lot of really honest work to teach those histories. But I also see that it's a very durable form because, you know, you get hundreds of people. There's no real substitute for this kind of engagement, and it doesn't satisfy everyone. But what I hope is that, you know, the coming generations will help us figure out a way to teach and experiment with the form.
Yeah, that's amazing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Totally relate to PACE days, because when you're talking about this pivot that PACE did, I remember that because I actually was at some of those shows that PACE threw on that were heavily influenced with hip hop. That's when I would see Knuckle Neck Tribe there, Raw Soul used to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, I even had a few dance battles in there during my time too. So I think bringing that volume of community-ness, I think was vitally important, and that pivot was excellent because that's what kind of made PACE step up their game a little bit more too. So, all right, Theo, thank you so much. We're going to put you down. We'll talk more about this when we bring everybody back.
Sure.
So appreciate you. My next guest is Xavier Hernandez, is Diversity and Inclusion Program Officer at UC Irvine College of Health Sciences. What's going on, Xavier?
Hi, thank you for having me. I just really want to first give a shout out to Theo and Anna. We didn't get to talk much backstage, but really, the knowledge that I have accumulated and put forth into the world about PCN really stands on their shoulders. So I thank you both very much. For me, a little bit about my background. In no uncertain terms, PCN has defined my life, right? I first did PCN when I was 14 years old as a freshman in high school, all the way until my first year out of undergrad at UCI, when I was working full-time at a law firm and still doing PCN at night. So I did 9 PCNs as a performer, and then went on to do research on PCN for my master's in Asian American Studies at San Francisco State, and then my PhD dissertation in education policy at the University of Illinois. At the University of Illinois, I was also an advisor to their Philippine Student Association, which started their PCN, I think, in 2013. And also, after that, I worked at Purdue University as a director of the Asian American Cultural Center, again, advising a very young PCN with their Filipino organization out in West Lafayette, Indiana. I'm not going to lie, I had a dream last week that I was in the middle of a PCN. I have no doubt, but I'll talk a little bit about UCI, and I echo many of the sentiments that Anna was telling about the history of UCLA. UCI has a very similar trajectory. The first PCN took place on June 2, 1980, and it was called the Filipino Cultural Awareness Night and Luau. And by the historical accounts of UC Irvine alumni, they had to have parents perform in this, and people's little brother and little sister perform in this, because there was no precedent really. It was just this show that they wanted to put on to promote Philippine cultural awareness. And again, similar to UCLA, throughout the years, it expanded and expanded into the biggest theater, and now the basketball arena at UCI, where it's been since the 90s. And what I think is unique about PCN at UC Irvine is that it really tells a lot about the history of UC Irvine as a whole. UCI, as far as the UCs go, is definitely younger than the bigger campuses at Berkeley and LA, but UCI has had the most Filipino American students in the UC system since 1996. And their PCN has really shown that. The casts are often above 300. Again, I mentioned like the big basketball arena for the show. And I think that that's part of how people at UCI really interpret and see PCN, because again, especially for people who went to UCI in the 90s and even the 2000s, you cannot lie that there's a chip on these people's shoulders because they didn't get into UCLA. Like, I'm just gonna keep it 100 there, right? And I think that when I talk to people, about UCI's that they often gravitate toward. This is our thing. This is what defines us as UCI Filipino Americans, that, we have this huge grand PCN, and it is, an institution on this campus, and all these opinions and feelings that really trace back to just wanting to have representation, wanting to have a place on this campus, right? I tell students this all the time, and I know that Theo and Anna will definitely relate to this, but when we were in college, and definitely up until our time as young adults, we could literally name every Filipino we saw on television, because there just were none, right? But I think, it's different nowadays when there's so many different media outlets and so much more of a diverse media landscape, that young Filipino Americans can see Filipinos everywhere, right? But back in the day, that's why everyone wanted to put all their chips into this basket. That's why everyone wanted to have a 6-hour PCN with 300 people in it, because they really felt like there were no viable alternatives. And again, going back to what Theo was saying about the money and how it's allocated, it says a lot about our institutions when, this song and dance number is seen as acceptable Filipino-ness to them, right? But when we want money for ethnic studies, that's nowhere to be found, right? It says a lot about how universities value diversity, that, they just leave it up to students rather than taking the onus on themselves to create knowledge. And granted, back then too, there were far fewer Filipino academics than there are now. I think, again, nowadays, as I look into the future of PCN, I think that the challenge really is, how can PCN accommodate to this expanding Filipino-American cultural landscape, that to really just complement all those things, right? So, the history, to sort of wrap it up, the history of PCN, really does belong to these individual universities and these individual campuses. I mean, we can't lose sight of that. I think so often our clubs are so inward facing, because PCN is such a big task, that we often don't get to see the bigger picture, right? So I think that that's what we do when we examine history of PCN. We take a look at the bigger picture and see, what does this mean for PCN as an educational tool? Because, there's a whole other bag of worms, right? But why aren't PCNs outside of universities? Because universities contain, and colleges and some high schools, right, contain the human and capital resources that we often can't find in other places. So yeah, looking forward to what the current students have to say, and contributing my expertise to this panel.
Awesome. And so real quick question, if you can answer really fast, is you've worked, like you mentioned, you work with schools in the Midwest, on the East Coast with their PCNs. Really quickly, maybe describe the differences between what the West Coast type of PCN is versus, like Midwest and East Coast. I'm sure there's a huge difference.
So, there's definitely an aesthetic difference. Again, they don't have the resources in the Midwest to necessarily do all 5 suites, to do the big stuff, right? Again, it changes from year to year, and it can be very fluid. And again, think about these Midwest college towns. The big difference, I'll say, is these Midwest college towns are literally in the middle of nowhere. And most Filipinos live in major cities like Chicago, Detroit, etc. So the PCNs in the Midwest are often more student focused, because parents can't make the drive out. But the feeling is the same, right? Students cry after these things. They put the this long dedication on Facebook and Instagram, right? Because it's still, even though it doesn't look aesthetically the same, what you feel in your heart and your soul, right? The sense of community that Anna was mentioning earlier, that's what you take with you, regardless of what the performative aspect of it looks like.
Amazing. All right, Xavier, thank you again for sharing with that. We're gonna put you down. We're gonna get to our next segment of our panel, and we'll bring you back up to talk more on the Beyond PCN. So you've heard a little bit about the history. So now let's talk about the present. So my next guests are students currently in college right now, and they are working with a Filipino club doing PCN. So these are our next generation leaders talking about their Filipino orgs and what they're doing right now. So let's bring on my first guest. It's Chichai. She is in the house. From Chichai, I'm sorry. I knew I was going to mess that up at some point. But Chichai is in the house. San Jose State is where she is at right now, or 8 years ago, right? Okay, I just want to make sure. So go ahead and just talk about the, when you were part of the PCN, what was the original intention of your org in doing these?
Yeah, so I went to San Jose State starting in 2009, and at least from what I saw, PCN was all about getting people immersed into what Filipino cultures have to offer, you know, throughout the Philippines, as well as Philam history in different parts of the Bay, which I'm like really proud of because, you know, I'm from Daly City, for example, and like there's hella Filipinos there. I come from a very saturated Filipino area, but I didn't learn about any Philam history at all until joining a PCN my freshman year. And I can talk a little bit about the intention of PCN when I was coordinator. So I was coordinator for 2011 to 2012 school year. And with my PCN was called SPAM, which stood for Secret to Filipino American Modifiers. So imagine a world in which there is a secret agency purposely forcing you to westernize yourself. And
Right.
yeah, and the whole premise of it was Filipinos rising up against this agency and being like, hey, we have hella to be proud about. Like, look at all that we have to offer through our song and dance and our activism. So that was the intent of my PCN, at least.
All right, and so I've been told we're going to also bring up JJ and Eleaine as well. So if you guys can go ahead and check, there you guys go. So just to introduce the rest of you guys, so JJ is from East Base PASA, and Eleaine is from Akbayan at San Jose State. You're the current PCN lead, so welcome you guys. So I know you guys kind of heard, you know, Anna, Theo, and Xavier talk about, you know, PCNs back when we were there. How does working with PCNs now compare to their original intent look like? So we could go ahead and start with Eleaine.
Well, I feel like initially, at least from the cabinet's perspective, like their intent is to educate about, you know, the history and, you know, really have people be exposed to this, like our beautiful culture. But I think that from the perspective of a participant, they really gravitate towards PCN because they long for the sense of belonging, and they really want to find somewhere to fit in, because especially transitioning from either a high school or from a junior college, there's really that uncertainty about where you fit in and where you belong. But beyond that, this is also, like, for myself, I could say at least, but I know for many people, PCN is their first glimpse of what like Filipino culture is. And like I knew nothing about like any of the sweeps. I knew nothing about like any of the history, because the extent of what I knew was probably one paragraph in my US history textbook from my freshman year, something like that, about the Philippine-American War. And then that was it. So it was really a way for me to dive into it. And also I could say that specifically for Irvine, it kind of shifted from kind of telling these historical, I guess you could say like an interesting take on historical events in Philippine history, to kind of having these more personal stories from each PCN coordinator. So like what Chichai said about her PCN, and then the very first PCN I was in was kind of more focused on how people in like Philippine households or Filipino households, they don't really get that support in the arts or in like in having like the creative passion to pursue like a career within, you know, the arts. And then what mine was about was kind of heavily focused on mental health, as well as you know, colorism, because that's an issue that became really relevant as of lately. So yeah.
Amazing. All right, JJ, what about you?
For our end at East Bay. We're on our 49th PCN, so we're still having that same format like every other PCN that we go to. I mean, we still have the show, we still have the scripted show, we still have, you know, the cultural dances. But the thing is, like, compared to now, we're just trying to make it like still have that wow factor, I guess, in a way, because like we all know PCN at this point in our lives. They're like, oh, we have it, but it's kind of like what keeps it going, what keeps the fire going in a way, I guess. I mean, and all of that, it's just the whole experience of being in a PCN. I mean, learning the stories of like that we don't know, that we don't really read in our textbooks, or just that community aspect of hospitality, of like, you know, meeting new people, but also engaging in our Filipinx culture as well. I mean, from my personal experience, I barely even learned about Filipinx history until I went to an ethnic studies class at Cal State East Bay. So I mean, it's still the same format, I guess, in a way, but like it's that compared to now, it's just, you know, that innovation, what keeps it going, like keep that drive going.
So PCNs may have this connection to identity, right? Because when you think of a PCN, like what you all mentioned, it talks about history or even issues that we all experience, you know, today. And so I'm just curious to know, how are you guys communicating or inspiring others to really check out what a PCN is all about and what it means, you know, to a personal identity? Because, you know, when in our stages in life, most of the time you won't really know your identity until you get to your discovery phase, which is usually high school, college, right? Once you start to getting high school and college, then you start to ask more questions about your identity and where you fit in. So let's talk about like, what are you guys doing to inspire those who may not be there yet? How are they being taught about what a PCN is all about? Chichai, let's go with you.
I was like, not me first. Well, I mean, that's kind of harder since I've been out of college for a while. But I do know whenever I have like a younger cousin or someone's younger sibling is joining university, the first thing that I always say is to join a PCN, especially because, you know, like I said, I come from a dominantly Filipino area, yet I didn't feel enriched or connected or even proud of who I am as a Pinay until joining PCN. So that's like kind of my elevator pitch too, you know? And then also coming out of that, you get your lifelong friends from PCN as well. Like, I don't know how you can have rehearsals until like 2 a.m. for how many days a week and not come out with, you know, some of your best friends out of that. Small plug, I got a husband out of my PCN.
Join a PCN if you want a relationship goal. Hashtag.
Friendship goals, friendship goals. That was just an extra credit gift. But for real, like, you not only get those lifelong lessons and being proud about who you are, but you are also coming out with family for sure.
All right, Eleaine, what about you?
I think, I definitely agree with Chichai, because I found that just by expressing interest in PCN myself and, you know, spamming my social media about like my PCN experiences and things like that, being unapologetically so invested in, you know, furthering my understanding of my identity, I found that that alone has been enough to like at least inspire a few people, because then people get curious. They're like, oh, what is that? I remember I even posted a picture or some like a campaign photo for my for Akbayan elections when I was running for PCN coordinator, and someone was like, one of my closest friends, she was like, what are you wearing? I've been seeing those a lot lately. And I had to explain to her what a malong was. And, you know, it's like those little things, like I wouldn't have any idea what a malong was if I didn't do PCN. And then so it's like those little tidbits of culture and things like that that really get people to express interest. And then after that, the conversation shifts from, oh, what's a malong, to, oh, how'd you learn about it? Oh, how'd you learn about it? Oh, what's a PCN? Then it's like, oh, you're running for PCN coordinator. Well, what is it? And then, you know, just gets the ball rolling, and then everyone, like more and more people start to gather interest in, you know, participating. So.
All right, JJ, you're next.
For me, at least, it's just finding identity, I guess. It's kind of just like everyone else. It's just like you gotta get really invested and interest in it. I mean, we're also curious, like you said, like how we're in our age, we're in like our searching point of where like what our identity is. And for me, I identify more as a American than Filipino, just because, you know, I was born here. I don't know anything about the Filipino history. So I try, like what I'm doing for PCN is doing a story about like Filipinx Americans and during the 90s. I mean, you know, like the artists during that time, like Kai and like Panay at the time, like those are the people I can relate to, because those are how I can find my identity through subculture. I mean, with Filipinos, it's so hard to find our culture sometimes because of how colonized we are during the time. We were conquered by Spanish, we're conquered by Americans. You know, we're kind of just like a mix, a hybrid of everything. So I think for me, at least, to find our identity is kind of just find something that's related to you, I guess.
Yeah. And that's great. And we can definitely help you on the music side, especially if you're going to do something along those lines. And I agree with you. I mean, like, if you really think of the true essence of Filipino and Filipino culture, a fusion culture, as much as some of us like to deny it, but the true essence of it is we are a fusion culture, and we should be very proud about that. So what I want to do now, I want to bring on our past three guests. I want Anna, Theo, and Xavier. I want to bridge this gap right now. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about moving forward. So let's go ahead and bring them on. So you guys go ahead and press that button to jump in. And what we're going to do now is moving forward. You know, like now that you guys are kind of in the thick of everything, you know, our past guests have done it as well. So I want to look for, you know, towards the future. How can college students who are in the thick of all of this continue their activism and cultural work beyond PCN? Who wants to jump in first? Xavier looks eager. Go ahead, Xavier.
Sure. I mean, I'm even seeing this question in the chat. I mean, you're in a space like where that is already like set to happen, right? This whole undiscovered platform. I think that, yeah, finding those connections to the community are super important. And there's more of them now than ever. And I think that, yeah, I mean, again, like I have the privilege to understand my PCN experience to just such a granular level because of the trajectory I've taken in my academic and professional career. But I think even if that's not your path forward out of college, like there's still so many community events, social media, ways that you can connect to this history and still see it and process it. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think understanding what exists beyond your school while you're in school is also very important. So things like NC PASA, SC PASA, whatever anyone's regional, you know, connection may be, because those are the connections that will also be fruitful for you in the future. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, Xavier. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Anna, you're smiling. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of the form itself, don't be wedded to that template of the PCN. Like, it's just an entry point. Go beyond it or incorporate educational and advocacy events and activities within that production process. Sources, both how can you use some of the resources you're getting for PCN for other things, like on campus, like Filipino studies or any kind of like the advocacy work that you do. And then for me, history is really important. Xavier touched upon it a little bit. You know, what we did was gather stories of our past PCN and some Hmong folks. And I would really encourage organizations to do that. Like, and we did that within the, we were able to get course credit for that. And I think that, you know, doing something like that where you can create ways to go get your oral histories and maybe create your own archives and have like a living archives that that exists alongside of the people made history and now you're making history. I think that is something else that you can also do, as well as like working outside of campus. I think that's also an important thing to do.
Awesome.
To Anna's point about don't be wed to the format, I'm not sure what everyone's school situation is like, but if there's a silver lining right now, is that there is so much room for innovation in the PCN genre, because who knows what PCN will look like in the immediate future. If it has to be digital, if it, has to be formatted and cut in a certain way or a certain length because of whatever the logistical constraints may be of our schools. That's the way forward, right? And again, the biggest example I can give again is in 1980 it didn't look like this. So like, what does it matter, right? Like I mean, again, I tell students this all the time. Remember your choreo, like do have fun on stage, but that is literally the last thing you will remember. Ask anyone who is, maybe Chichai, you can speak to this. Like, ask anyone who's 3-4 years removed from PCN, the last thing you'll remember is the choreo. Like, it's about the bigger picture that creates, right?
And maybe that's a good question for Chichai. So what do you remember working in the PCNs? Like, what is the most memorable thing for you?
Oh man, I think, well, as a PCN coordinator, the most memorable thing for me was cast members coming up to me and telling me how much being in the show meant for them, and how, for the first time they felt proud to be Filipinex. That is forever something that I'll hold on to myself. And even after, like, PCN actually inspired my master's thesis too. I went to University of San Francisco shortly after San Jose, and I got my master's in international studies, and my thesis was on how engaging in art that celebrates your cultures, thus kind of starts you on your decolonizing journey. And I was inspired from PCN because of what I held on to that. All of the people telling me how much PCN meant to them and how they became proud of themselves. And so I was like, there has to be a study on this phenomena of being engaged in this art that celebrates you.
And then, so maybe the next question actually would go to Mateo. My question for you is, how did you take your experience in working in, doing PCNs at State to then applying it to your current career now?
Well, I ended up writing a book about it, which is now 10 years old. If you were stuck in a class and you were forced to read it, then I hope it was of use to you. But I've kind of built a career around thinking about the idea of Filipino American history. And I'd like to round back to an earlier question that you had concerning what we can do in the future. And I think there, at least in my mind, there are a couple of suggestions. That one is on campus and the one is off. And for those that are recently graduated, one of the things that I think a lot of folks can do as alumni is to leverage your donations to your university campuses to turn that into real concessions. It's just recently happened that UCLA now has a Filipino American Studies certificate. I'm happy to see that. And I think a lot of campuses could really benefit from having that kind of institutional commitment. And as alumni, a lot of these campuses, we should be exercising some real power and leverage.
Yep.
And the only way we do that is if we pool capital to make that happen. Off campus, I think there are some real models for creating alternative forms of knowledge production. You have the Sama cooperative that teaches young kids. You have Little Manila that teaches young kids, all these cultural forms. And I think if we're not paying it forward to the youngest, we're not going to ever develop this idea that the culture is worth saving. And we're just going to wait until students get it in college, maybe high school. But the youngest of us should be learning about these cultural forms at the earliest of ages. And so whatever we can do to build those kinds of alternative modes of cultural knowledge, we should be doing that.
Amazing. All right. So this is kind of my last question, just we're kind of running out of time, but I want you guys to think about this one. What is one way you think Filipino orgs and PCNs can improve to deepen their community work and outreach? Eleaine, you look like you're ready to talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was about to unmute myself actually. No. I think that one thing that we could definitely do to improve is kind of, I guess if there's like one thing I could think from the perspective of a PCN coordinator or past PCN coordinator is that we could really improve on the authenticity of what we're putting out. I think that there's one thing that I wanted to start, but I was unfortunately, like due to circumstances I couldn't do, but I wanted to start this connection with Parangal Dance Company. And, you know, because they actually go on these trips to the Philippines and they observe and with their permission, like they observe indigenous groups and, you know, they don't take their dances, like they don't record it and just reuse that in their pieces, but they use the movements that they've seen that they know that are authentic and real. And they create their own choreography based off of that to tell like stories, whether it be like their rituals or if it's farming, things like that. And so one thing I wanted to do was have that kind of mentorship with a dance company like Parangal, because they could teach kind of the importance of how, the one thing that bothered me was that people are like, do it for your ancestors, but these people are still alive. And so that's why I was like, we need to do better at representing these people who are still alive. And for the most part, none of them have given their permission for us to use these dances, you know, and to use like what's real to them, like that they practice, you know. And so, yeah, that's like one thing I wish. And then to also educate the members. It's one thing to learn the dance, but it's another thing to really fully know what you're doing and what you're representing.
Yeah, appreciate that. Anyone else?
I like to add on as well, just like, honestly, we live in such a great time just to reach people, all these alumni, I guess. I mean, I think they're like the best influence, I guess, when it comes to PCN, because they experience, when you're putting on a show, like, there's going to be a lot of first timers just performing out there. And like, I feel like if we have like, you know, if we reach out to like the OGs, like, you know, Theo and Anna, just like, kind of like share their experience, you know, it will just inspire us to continue to innovate our PCN. Not only just have, what you call it, just guest speakers, but also kind of just branching out to other orgs. I mean, we're at the end of the day, but all our orgs are, it's the same concept. We're spreading Filipinx awareness. So I feel that's like one of the best ways we can like continue to deepen our work and outreach.
All right, you guys, we got time for one more. Who wants to chime in?
Well, I mean, I'm actually sounding the familiar refrain of like, reach out to your alumni. But again, like since Theo started that ball rolling, I mean, that was what I wrote down, involve your alumni, but not just like as guest speakers. I mean, involve them in your process, you know, like with teaching the workshops, having events, having activities, having them mentor. And then at UCLA, we have a Filipino Alumni Association. Create a Filipino Alumni Association that's institutionalized at your school so that you can have a space and a place to do that fundraising, to have like something structural to support this long-term kind of legacy connecting. So, you know, I guess alumni. I will chime in for that.
Amazing. So I'll chime in my last few cents. I think like you look at where everyone communicates now. I mean, like we're all here with Anna in the Philippines and we're all communicating on Hopin, right? So I think like utilizing the technology that's in front of you and don't limit your PCNs to just one particular day or one particular month. I think even creating a podcast that is like year long about like Filipino history, creating a video series on YouTube or IG or any of these things that kind of incorporate that. So I think thinking outside the box and how a PCN can be more adaptive and more I guess, accessible to everyone, because you guys have the resources and the technology to do it. You know, especially now. I mean, like we're in a world where live streaming is the thing to do right now because we can't see each other face to face. You know, so that would be my only 2 cents: is just take whatever you have in front of you and just expand on it and do more, because you can. You know, so all right, let's do some quick shots out before everyone gets out of here. We'll start with Chichai. We'll go all the way down. Just go quickly plug your stuff, and then we'll wrap things up.
Doing? I'm so sorry.
Just you're like, how can people find you if you have anything you want to plug your book? Go ahead.
Thank you, Marlino. So I am Chichai. I am the founder of streetwear brand Empire in the Air. We are longtime fans of Undiscovered. I'll type it in the chat. Find me there.
All right, go ahead, Eleaine.
I guess if there's one thing I could shout out, it's Lead Filipino. You could follow them on Instagram and Twitter at Lead Filipino. I was previously an organizer, but yeah, follow them. I think they have an event coming up called, or it's like under the Fly Panized tier, but yeah, check it out.
Amazing. JJ?
Just shout out to my work, PASA at CSU East Bay. We're on IG, Twitter, Facebook. Yeah, that's it for me.
All right, go ahead, Theo.
Stay in touch. I'm on Twitter at Theo Gonzalves, and you could also reach me at my website, theogonzalves.com. I'm happy to talk with folks about any of this.
Xavier.
I mean, I just want to give a shout out to my club, UCI, Papa Buy-In. You know, again, for all students, I think keep an eye on them to see what they're doing. And also the newly formed UCI Filipino American Alumni Association, who had a successful event earlier today. That's another example of a group that will be trying to flex some institutional power for Filipino American students in the future.
And last but not least, Anna, go ahead.
Hi, shout out to UCLA Samahan. Hey, if you want to reach me to hear about like how we did the archives collection or any of these resources, and I also worked in the foundation world in arts and culture, so we can talk about infrastructure stuff. I'm on Twitter at Slayerella, and you can also email me. I'll put that in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for being here. And Gina, go ahead, last words.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone so much. I love seeing these different generations of PCNs coming together. And if you want to continue building too, please join us for our college meetup that's coming up soon with Kumu. You could fill out the doodle that I just put in there, and we're also doing our best to keep uniting Pilorgs across the country. So thanks y'all for this conversation.
All right, you guys, appreciate